Hello and welcome to Fat Man Paints. Brand new channel. I have a huge backlog of Tyranids, of Tau and Space Marines, and I need to clear them down before I get too many more and just have an overwhelming pile of shame to clear down. So a little bit of work to do today. We're going to start finishing off the skin or the flesh of these three Tyranid Warriors. Finish off as much as possible of these heads of some Hive Lords and these Infestation Nodes. And if we manage to get through there, a little bit of work about updating this Intercessor's base from a nice volcanic one to a much more contrasting Mars type approach. And if we've still got time after that, I've got some prep work to do on some bases to test some concrete and some granite. And if we manage to get that done as well, I have a whole bunch of inceptors that need to be prepped ahead of priming and painting. Anyway, let's crack on. So my Tyranids start off with a white base coat. I always tend to do the carapace, the chidden first. My scheme and process is very forgiving, so I manage to kind of hide mistakes from earlier ones in each subsequent one. So to finish off the skin, normally I do a lot of dry brushing. I start with some Kevlar flesh, elder flesh, tyrant skull, screaming skull, wraithbone, and then finally finish off with some Pallid Wych flesh. Now for these fellas, they're not too big, they don't need all of that layers to go in, so we can skip several of these and speed up the process. We don't need the Kevlar flesh. We'll stick with the no, we'll skip Eldar flesh. We'll keep Tyrant skull. We'll skip Screaming skull. Keep the Wraithbone, and we'll keep the Pallid Wych flesh. I also do a little bit of Flash Terror's red contrast, the little vents and the little splits.
Taking up all of the bandwidth.
Am I taking up all of the bandwidth in the house?
Everything is going wrong.
Oh, that's wonderful. I've killed my family's internet, everybody.
At least on the computers.
That's so I'm quite happy about that. That's good. The kids are going to have to do something else other than stare at YouTube for a little bit. So we're all good there. Anyway, let's crack on. We've got a lot of work to do. So we're going to start off with some Tyrant Skull dry. I have a little bit of a luxury here. I have a little vortex cleaner, vortex stirrer, so I'll give a bit of the go of the dry. But as we all know that Games Workshop paints, especially their dry pigment stuff, is almost like painting with, well, painting with glue. Anyway, right, so what we're going to start off with is, let's pick a dry brush. I quite like the Citadel small dry brush. I think it gives a bit of control, but easy to use any brush you wish. So let's have a go. So I think one of the modern things these days, people have been talking an awful lot about a dry brush palette, a way of taking paint off your brush without any of the moisture being absorbed by a kitchen towel. I've not tried that. I've had a lot of success over the years with just using a little bit of kitchen towel. I like to use a textured one so I can see just how we are with the progress. So there we go. So I've taken a fair bit of paint off. Let's just start working our way over the model. Let's just catch bits of the flesh. Try and be a little bit systematic about how we approach this. Normally by the end of this dry brushing session I'll have covered most of the kitchen towel in the paint. It won't look like I have that much on the model, but each subsequent layer makes a big difference to how we go. It doesn't need to be a heavy dry brush, it just needs to be light and a little bit all over. It will just help. Oh, bloody paint pots. It'll just help soften up the initial base coat and wash that we put on here. So let's keep going on. Just work our way. Oh, just a bit there. So the painting I do is really to get a good level of tabletop ready games. Nothing I do here is going to win any golden demons. That's not where I'm painting for here. This is to get a good painted army onto the tabletop. The nice bases, nice level of detail and colour on the models, just so we've got something that we can really be pleased with when we put it on the table. So way more than our 3 colour minimum, but also something that doesn't require a lot of skill. I'm not a very good painter. Something really that's easy to do. It's all about technique. It's all about trying to do it as quickly but efficiently and effectively as possible, and about having something that looks pretty good at the end of the day. Right, I know I've got a pretty shitty camera. It's not quite what I was expecting. I was hoping that I would be able to have something a little clearer, a little more, but my very old DSLR just wasn't up for the job, and you know, I'm not spending 700-800 quid on a nice Sony A700 or whatever the latest ones are, just for a glorified webcam. It's just not worth it at the moment. That, and coupled with the fact that there are an awful lot of new Space Marines, Tyranids, Codexes, probably new Tau on the horizon, and lots of new models coming along that I would want to paint. And you know, they're not cheap. So instead of a camera, for the time being, I'm going to stick with what I've got. I'm going to buy some models and see where we go. What I am going to use my old DSLR for, though, is recording some tutorials. I've got some good basing ideas and stuff that I do, some general tips and hints. And over the next couple of weeks, I will get round and I'll get all those documented and uploaded onto the YouTube channel. And then you can have a look if any of those may be useful to you. Most of the reason I'm doing this is my lad is starting his experience of painting Space Marines, so a lot of the tutorials are kind of aimed at him, so he's got a great bit of background about how we approach and the recipe we use for the Marines we're painting for him. So there we go, that's what we're up to at the moment. So that's the first coat of the first one done. Move along, time for a beer. So normally when I'm painting I listen to music in the background, but with Twitch's policy of copyright, we're not going to be doing that today. So you'll just have to pretend that you're listening to the same thing that I would be. And probably at the moment I'd be listening to a bit of Bicep. So a bit of a new band for me. I watched their set on the TV from the recent Reading Music Festival. It's pretty awesome, right up my street for kind of music. So I've been listening to them quite a bit recently. So if you want to put your own accompanying music on, bit of Bicep in the background is what you would be listening to. Obviously, as you can tell, I'm not very experienced of streaming, not very experienced with all this new technology. when it goes silent, make your own entertainment. Just depend, nothing's going on. Right, making some slow progress on these guys. It's going to take a little bit of time as we go through. Just make sure we get a little bit on all of the model itself. All those highlights, all those edges, and bring those up with the dry brush. As I said, this is never going to win any awards. When you combine all of these models onto the table, they do look pretty good. We've got a 70, 80 already done of various troop ones, so when you do put them together, they are quite exciting to look at. It's really nice having a quite large coherent army on the table. Right, this fella's getting nearly there. Right, third fella. Then we'll give the brush a bit of a clean. We'll go with the heads and infestation nodes. Give them the same kind of treatment, the same colours, going through what we need. Go. So you can tell now the brush needs a bit of a clean. It's starting to feel a bit sticky with the paint coming through, so it needs a bit of a rinse. Just push on a little further with this figure before we do that, and it'll be fresh for the next bits. As I said, my process is quite forgiving, so I start off with my Tyranids. They get a white prime and a pretty heavy one, so they've got a good white base to work everything from. Then I work on all the carapace type chitin pieces, so that's the tail bit, the chest plates, weapon bits, obviously the heads and what have you, and we work up a nice kind of feathered effect on those. Any overspill then I just paint over white so that the rest of the body is back to where it was. I then run a wash over that white and then slowly start building up more of an in-depth rich layered colour with with dry brushing and the various layers. The smaller the model, the less layers I need. The bigger the model, the more layers I get in there to give more contrast and variation as we go through the process, to help just give a bit more depth and variety into the bit of the flesh, just so it's not all exactly the same kind of colour. There's a bit of tonal variety that we go through on all the bits and pieces there. Alright, this fella, this first count I think is about done. Caught a lot on there. Let's pop those there. Let's give a bit of a clean of the brush. So as not to confuse drinking mugs with water cups, I tend to use these little goo pots that have come from desserts. Give them a clean, just put them in water. Perfect size for brush water for cleaning. Right, let's just get some of that off there. Just make it feel a little bit cleaner. Get rid of all that dry paint on there that's causing us some problems. Right, there we go. Those three are done. We move on to our tyrant heads, and then we can move on to our infestation nodes. Right. Same process as before, but these should be quite a bit quicker, much less complicated. We have much less space that we need to paint on these. So I know quite a few people will use the Games Workshop model holder, but also there's a lot of other ways that you can hold your models and pieces of models before you come around to painting them. So I use these little pieces of offcut of wood, and then I use either a bit of blue tack underneath, which I then stick a base on, or a cocktail stick which is trimmed and fastened with some PVA glue, and then certainly in the case of these tyrant heads, I drilled a small hole into the base that'll be covered when it actually attaches to the model. Then a little drop of PVA glue in there, so it's easy to break it off when we're finished. And that just allows for easy handling of the model. You don't really want to be touching the models at all with fingers. Even if you wash them to take all that grease off, you naturally develop a lot of grease, and if you're touching your models in the process, all that grease just helps the paint slip off, just like grease in a frying pan. It just makes it more difficult for the paint to adhere. So the cleaner your hands, the less you touch them, better all round. Right, this is coming along quite nicely now. Hive Tyrants that these belong to have not been painted yet, but as I was in the process of painting some warriors, I thought I'd get these wraps up as well, and then at least they're ready for when the bodies are done and they can just go straight on. That'll do for that one. Let's move on to the infestation nodes. We'll start with this one. Infestation nodes, we're kind of a thing in 8th and 9th, but in 10th looks like, well, we get a new Tyranid codex available tomorrow, but as it stands at the moment, they don't do anything. They're no longer in the game. They're no longer part of the Genestealer data card. But what they can be used for is objective markers. So in the case of this, I've got a number of skulls on here. I think I've got 6. This is objective number 6 if we need it. I've got 5 more that I'd finished before, and they're all sitting on the shelf with everything else on me. So this is number 6, and then we won't need any more. The other item there is just an infestation node. Should it come back, or should we choose to do something with Genestealer cults, because I believe that they are still an element for that in 10th. They could always factor in there if we decide to expand our armies into yet another faction. For the time being, it's just a bit more decorative. And I think from the various Genestealer boxes and kits, starter sets and what have you, and I still have quite a few of the Infestation Nodes left available, and they'll probably all end up being some sort of kind of basing enhancement for some of the larger models that are in the Tyranid roster. We've got some Tyranid effects, we've got an Exocrine, we've got a few bits and pieces that I need to start putting some more detail onto the bases. Now large bases just have nothing on. Right, there we go, that's not too bad for a first coat. And then let's do the last one, and then get our brush clean and move on to the next paint in the cycle. Maybe difficult to tell from this really shitty camera, but these are a little shiny from the wash. That's not a problem, because once we finish painting, I'll be getting a nice dull coat in a rattle can against these to tone them down and lock it all in. I tend to really like the Tamiya fine surface primers, and also the Tamiya varnish rattle cans as well. They tend to give a really good even coating for the priming, really strong adhesive properties both against the base model from the primer but also for the painting layers that I put on subsequently. Never had any issues with paint flicking off, adherence or anything like that through the Tamiya primers. I use a combination of white for my Tyranids and then grey pretty much for everything else. And it works really well. I swear by that. I wouldn't use anything different. For sealing the models at the end, there's quite a lot of different options you get. Again, I stick with Tamiya flat clear, again in a small rattle can. Gives a really flat seal to the models, and nothing that I can really improve on. Now, creme de la creme is Testors flat, but that's really expensive. It is the best. It is as flat can be, but you know the Tamiya one does its job very well. It locks everything in, keeps the model protected, and allows handling on the game board without any particular problems at all. Right, we've finished our first layer. Next we'll be cleaning the brush, moving on to Wraithbone and going through the whole thing again, just adding a little more detail onto the building up a little more detail as we go through, a little more on each of the, a little more layers on each of that, just to give a little more definition, a little more tonal difference on each of the layers. So let's clean the brush. Let's check the score for France, New Zealand in the Rugby World Cup. France are 6 points ahead. It's quite a tight game. We'll see where that ends up. Right. Okay. Let's give this a good shake on the there you go, that rattle there is the vortex cleaner on the table. I'm going to have to move the location of that on, so that's not very good over there. Let's try it over here. There we go. Here's a nice mix for the paints with that one. I do have some steel ball bearings that I mix into some of the paints, depending on how much I use it, how bad the paint is to start with. It's not a bad thing to do. Pop two of these in. I've got quite a bit of my Wraithbone left in there, so I think I'll put two in. And then that'll help with any mixing in the future that we need to do. Two in there. seal that up so I don't knock them over and get them all over the floor. Put a little 2 on top so I know how many balls are in there. There we go, you can hear it now. Got a bit of a further agitation in the vortex mixer. Should be pretty good with that one now. Let's have a look. Yeah, it's not too bad for a Games Workshop paint. Right, I'm going to take a brief break. I'll be back with a fresh beer in a moment or two. There we go. France have extended their lead. They're now 2 scores above New Zealand with 7 minutes to go. Interesting result. We'll see how we go. It's nice and cold. Yes, we're in the middle of a heat wave in the UK in September. It's still in the paint room here, 27 degrees. But 10 o'clock at night. So yeah, still quite a warm evening. Quite hot and humid and sticky. So not ideal for. Oh god, I fucking hate Games Workshop paint pots. There we go. All messy and it'll dribble in horrible ways. That's like cream. Right. Never mind, let's press on. So, as we said, we're going for a slightly lighter colour on the dry brush now. Get the brush nicely laden on the dry brush. Take our model and let's start all over again. It is going to be really quite tricky to see with this crappy camera, but you can really see on the model that as we go through with these lighter and lighter colours, it's really starting to pick up the edges. It's really starting to highlight those little corners, the raised areas, the flat areas on the model. So to build up a real bit of definition against all of these elements of the figure. You don't need to be an absolute steady hand genius who can do a millimetre thick line for edge highlighting. You just be careful with your dry brush and you can still work really great results. So I was explaining to my son, it's almost like painting by numbers, except instead of numbers It's 3D shapes. Each bit has its own colour. Each shape, each little thing is just as you need it to be. You pick your colour, you make a note of what you do for it, and then you just rinse and repeat for all models of that faction. Obviously apart from your heroes and your centerpieces. Deal with those guys later. But rinse and repeat. And as I said, almost like 3D, paint by numbers. Know what you've got, know what you need to do. And it makes the process a lot simpler. There's less guesswork involved. Just stick to the recipe and away you go. So I've got a couple of spreadsheets, one for each army that I paint, which at the moment is Tyranid, and we are just starting on a Salamander army with all the Space Marines that we seem to have left over from our Tyranid starter set. So from Leviathan and from the original starter sets from the 8th edition, so No Fear and Dark Imperium. So they're all slowly getting to be, or all slowly going to be painted as salamanders, as good guys as the Space Marines can be. But that's for another night. Today we are focusing on Tyranids. As I said, the idea is to make a bit of inroads into the backlog. I was nearly done until Leviathan, and then I had another 20 termagants to go through, plus the barb gaunts and all the other little fellas that are in there. So these things don't paint themselves. We need to make a bit of an effort, push through and just get these fellas painted. Right, I think he's done. On to the next fellow. Oh, France have just scored a try. I think the game is theirs. Right. Let's move on to the next Tyranid with his most phallic weaponry. Let's brush against the edges. Let the paint do the work of capturing those highlights where we want the light to fall and balance off. Keeping our way around the model, area by area. Now we should be quite safe doing this. The model, certainly this model, is large enough that we can keep the dry brush pretty much away from all the chitting that we've already put into the model. But if we needed to, we could always use a smaller brush and use that as a dry brush. We don't have to stick with what Citadel Games Workshop call their small dry brush. I think this is a large one, if truth be told. It does its job quite well. It gives the flat side that allows us to get some good broad brush strokes across the model. Get these highlights up and done. So I have to admit I don't actually play Warhammer. I do like the figures. I think they're great. I'm actually more of a scale modeler by hobby. So the old type of Airfix, Revel, Dragon, Meng, Mini Arts, all those guys is mostly where my real kind of intro into the hobby came from. Those are the things I like building, sort of tanks, predominantly armour. But coming from that background, it's actually a real pleasure working with Games Workshop figures. The detail is really crisp. The design of the kits, the way they go together, is exceptional. It's really, really well done, and the plastic is also an absolute joy to work with. If you've ever worked with some of the Revel, it's really soft, really soft stuff. Some AFE club stuff. Oh, it can be really a pain to work for. So no, the Games Workshop models are absolutely fantastic these days. But also, I'm old enough that I really remember the old D&D days when Games Workshop was actually Games Workshop. They didn't really carry any of their own games. They were stockists for D&D, Traveller, Paranoia back in the day. You name it as a role-playing game, they stocked the supplements, the rules, and then they had their own release of figures, their Citadel release. And the amount of white metal figures that I had and still have somewhere is absolutely outstanding. I spent all my pocket money with those guys for years and years and years. Played a lot of D&D, and I was accompanied on the adventure by all of those awesome little white metal miniatures from back in the day. But as model kits go, the Games Workshop stuff these days is excellent. Like I said, the fit, the design of the sprues, the way they go together, the detail that's in here, the imagination. It's a pleasure working with these things. Apart from when they don't go together, and of course an art pain. And I'm looking at some of that Tau armour, the devilfish. My God, the seams on there, the amount of filler I poured into that thing. One day that'll be finished. Probably weigh twice as much as the original kit with the amount of filler that goes into it. But that's another day. We'll worry about that later. Right, on to our last Tyranid Warrior. Let's get the paintbrush loaded. Start giving it a go. Pulling up this. And after we finish this layer across all of these models, give the brush a really good clean. I'll use some brush soap on it, really lift out all the pigment work we've done, and then I've got a little bit of detail work to do in the vents, as we said, and before we finish off our dry brushing on this one. So a little bit more to do. Let's see how we come through for this one. I think given where we are this evening, I've still got a few hours of work that I'll quite happily wander through. And hopefully, if we can get some good progress, it'll send me in a nice place to open up. Hopefully, what I might get tomorrow is a whole bunch of the new Tyranid releases. So I think on the way we have a Pivor, have a Death Leaper, we have the what else do we have? We have the Pivor, Death Leaper, we've got the Norm Emissary coming along, we've got a Lictor, we've got a Neuro Lictor, we've got the Codex itself, for the people who do play in the house to start perusing and looking through and start rebuilding lists. So I'll be quite happy. And also, if everybody delivers their jobs properly, I should get a whole bunch of new paints that I need for a couple of other bits of painting experiments on basing and some of the work around the flamers for the salamanders, making sure that they stay very much thematic in their weapon choices we go for. Anyway, until then, we still have a bunch of Tyranids that we need to progress and paint. So let's knock ourselves out and let's just push on with this. Fella. And we can move on to the simpler bits and pieces. Let's just that'll do for the time being. Let's give a quick rinse of the paintbrush. France won convincingly in the end. An interesting start to the Rugby World Cup. We have England tomorrow against Argentina at 8 o'clock PM UK time. That should be quite a challenge, given how England have been playing, how Argentina are. I don't necessarily fancy England's chances too much. I think they're going to have quite a challenge. Anyway, that's tomorrow's enjoyment. Not tonight. Right. Let's crack on with our Hive Tyrant heads. Said with my shitty camera, you're not really going to see too much of the effect that's coming up here, but trust me, bro, it is working. It is catching these highlights. It really is. So I want to bring this out into some really nice tonal detail with some nice contrast between the raised and the lowered flesh areas, just accentuate that shadowing. Right, I have a lot of beer in the freezer I'm going to have to rescue soon, otherwise I'm going to have beer lollipops, and that ain't what I want to be drinking tonight. So let's take an opportunity to finish with this colour, get the paint clear on the brush. Take a brief moment as we move on to the next colour. So if you're still mentally listening to the same thing I am, Still got a couple of minutes left of bicep, but I'm going to switch from that to a little bit more of a old school element item. We're going to go with massive attack and mezzanine, which is possibly one of the darkest, broodiest, emotive albums that I remember. It's just the way the whole thing pulls together is just awesome. One of my favourite albums. Then after that, I think we might find ourselves moving on mentally onto some Chemical Brothers. That sounds like be a good one for tonight. Right, nearly there. We've just got our Infestation Nodes to finish for this dry brush layer. Then we'll clean our brush, have a couple of moments break, and come back to do some super detailed painting on those warriors before we come back and finish off our dry brushing completely. Move on to something else on the model, which I think will probably be starting the claws and swords on both on basically the warriors. One more. I will, in a future session, go into some more detail about how I prep and implement the various bases that I've got. So I've got a couple of different bases that we use. We've got a similar kind of style to heavy metal that I use for my Tyranids, which is a bit of a kind of dark, dry, stony, patchy grass kind of type wastelandish area. We've got a nice Martian kind of style that I'm going to be using for the salamanders. We've also got the very thematic lava type volcanic base that was contemplating for the salamanders, but it doesn't really contrast very well with the models themselves. It doesn't help the models stand out from the base at all, even though it looks pretty good and very, very simple to do. But we'll cover those in another day. Another go. Right. I'm happy with how those are. Let's deal with all really ganky Games Workshop stuff. So the models are awesome. Their paint range in terms of colour and styles is great. But God, their pots are an absolute disgrace. I have knocked over and spilt so many of them despite being super careful. But never mind. Right, I'm going to use a little bit of brush soap just to try and take some of the pigment out of this just for a moment. Just try and keep the brush a little light, and I will give it a full clean at the end of the session just to make sure there's no paint left on it, so it becomes as useful as possible for tomorrow. There is an advantage with dry brushes though, that it doesn't matter in some ways. You know, the brush is never going to survive very long when you use it as a dry brush. The roughness, the way you use it, the way you drag it across everything, you know, it's not going to survive. Right, so got a lot of paint off there. Okay, so let's clean that one. Let's put that water off to the side. We don't want to contaminate that. I'll change that in a few minutes' time. Put my soap away. Right. There we go. Next up then, Flesh Terrors Red. Maybe a little tricky to see on here, but in our Tyranid models, you have these little splits in their skin, these little vents all over, and we have these kind of segmented joints at the legs and sometimes in the elbows. So foolish me, when I first painted one of these, I filled those in with Flesh Terrors Red, and so now I'm kind of stuck in that process of using this to update and put that little bit of detail into the model. Now it does really help. It does break the model up quite a bit. It does add a little bit more to the model, but I fucking hate doing it, I tell you. These big sausage fingers, those little vents, it doesn't always work very well. I always seem to pick a brush that doesn't really want to do the job for me. So let's see what I've got. I'm probably going to use a relatively small. Let's see what I've got. It's a bit small. I'm going to try with a. Here we go. I'm going to try this with a double O Winsor & Newton sable brush. I'm going to see how this fella will do for this one. Just give him a bit of a clean. Possibly really difficult to tell. He's got a nice fine point. Hopefully something that I'll be able to keep in the nice little parts of the models. Nothing to do with these fellas. Right, there we go. Before we start that, I am going to go and grab another beer and rescue what I've got from the freezer. And then come back to do a little more back in the bow. Right. Ooh. It's a bit of a chunky beer. It was in the freezer a little bit too long, that one. Never mind. It is proper ice cold. Right. Let's give this a bit of a roll in the vortex mixer. The pot's nearly done, so I'm not adding any ball bearings into this for the time being. It's not particularly necessary on this one. Right. Let's try and take some of this gunk away from this. So I use contrast as it properties work really well for what we want to try. We want something that's a bit transparent but it's strong in pigment. It'll really get into the bits and pieces and really highlight what we want. So a little bit on the brush, make a decision, start painting into the model itself. It is going to take a little bit of time. I'm probably going to be as quiet as I can be so that I can focus on not fucking up this little bit. With always something like this, it's just take your time, look at an area of the model, decide what you're going to do, follow on, do it, don't put too much paint on the brush. And let the model guide you. The detail on the model is there to help us in this case, rather than hinder. But as I said, this technique, the steps that I use is forgiving, because once we've got all this in, we're going to do another dry brush over the top, and that will help highlight any slight overpaints that we may have. So we do have a little bit of leeway if we have done there, we go slightly over. As I said, I did make a bit of a rod for my own back when I first started doing this. Let's see if we can get the camera in a better spot for us all. Move here a bit. But now I've started, I'm generally quite happy with how it goes, because it does really add a bit of variety into the tone and skin of the model. And I know not everybody does it. It's not something that everybody puts into their Tyranid models. But I'm quite, apart from being annoyed at how long and how fiddly it is, I am quite happy with how it does help bring the model up and give a little bit more detail into it. But at the same time, there's no need being too anal about it. These are little things that are seen on a table. If you miss one, or one's just a little bit too hard to get to, oops, I wouldn't worry about it. I've just done a little bit of a overfake there. Let's see if we can just take a little bit of that off. There we go. ultimately, if you're playing the game, you're not going to be spending too much time looking at little mistakes. You're going to be concentrating on your tactics and how you're going to be beating your opponent. As I said at the beginning, my process is about being able to put together a nicely painted, coherent army, more than just the 3 colours on the table. But we are not going to be winning any golden demon awards with this stuff. It is about having a coherent army on the table, not as quickly as possible, but being pleased and proud of what we can put on there. We'll see how we go. It's also important to kind of, whenever you can, try and keep the brush clean so the paint doesn't dry on there, because if the paint dries on there, it's not going to flow off onto the model nicely. There we go. It's going to take some time to go through these. It's good if you can to try and focus on one area of the model at a time, which I am not doing. That way you make sure you don't really miss anything if you try and focus on one area. That was a bit ugly. This was the old Blue Peter days, would be roughly having that moment where we say, and here's one I finished earlier. Yes, on my spreadsheet that tracks the colours that I need to paint my models, I have a note about saying about this particular task saying you hate it, push through. And you know what? Every time I get here, he's right. I do hate this. I don't enjoy this little detail painting. It annoys me because I'm not very good at it. But there we go, we're getting there on this one. Right, this fella is nearly done. So let's, oops. Look around. Have I got everything I can easily get to? I can't. Oh, there's just one more there. I can't easily get to it. It's not a problem because if you can't easily get to it, you can't easily see it. If you can't easily see it, you'll never know. I can't easily get to that one with the way it is. There we go. Right, you probably can't tell on this rubbish camera, but there we go. We've done all little bits where we need to on that one. Let's give the brush. Get rid of that paint from there. No residue on there, that's all good. We got that cleaned off. Number 2. Right, we've got on this big phallic weapon. We have a lot of this stuff to do, so let's get this one over and done with first. That's that one mostly done. A little one above it sorted. Move on to the. There's too much paint on there. Let's do the other side. Let's repeat. Let's do the little one first. There we go. That was mostly good enough. Like I said, the process is forgiving. So if there's any slight overruns, the next layer of dry brush. We'll cover that up. Right. Let's press on. Because as I keep saying, I do not enjoy this bit of the painting. And after doing it the first time, it is an absolute rod for my back. When you're painting a batch of 24 Hormigants, I really, really regretted this. Really, really, really regret it. Interestingly, I may have caused my kids to go to bed early with streaming, because it seems to have sucked the bandwidth out of the house. That benefits all round. this fella. Oh, where are we going? The leg. Oh,
I opened it a bit.
thank you, daughter.
Do you want me to take the other two cans to it?
No, we're good.
Bye bye.
Bye bye. Wonderful having children. They are wonderful servants if you bribe them correctly. Cheers. Side of the legs, which are going to be bugger. Don't cover very well. Put some more on. There we go. He is good enough. Right, one more. One more to do on this fella. Two down, one to go. Let's start with the weapon first. By the way, I'm not taking paint off the brush onto the cutting mat. I have a small piece of glass here which I've taken from a old picture frame. So rather than have a mixing palette, but we're certainly not going for a wet palette, it's a step beyond my capability. I mean, I'm not planning to do any blending or any gradient work like that. But in lieu of a kind of palette, you can get the kind of the Games Workshop shiny card things. I just use a simple piece of glass. It's smooth, it's easily to clean, it doesn't absorb anything. It works really well. It's a really good compromise on the components for mixing. So in some of the other activity I do when mixing some paints, or I use some Vallejo which come in the dropper, what I tend to do is put a little drop onto the glass, and I work from that one. I can easily mix in water and mix it around. And then it's also easy to clean off with a little bit of toilet roll. Ready to go for the next time. You can also use white ceramic tiles. I am looking for some spare ones that people have don't need anymore, and they'll be they're pretty good as well, and they probably give you a little more contrast on the paint than transparent. Here we're obviously working with a green background, which isn't ideal, but for today it's good enough. Nearly got this champ finished. Well, that was very bad camera, wasn't it? You couldn't see what on earth I was doing there. Never mind. I live and learn. This is the first time I've done this, so please bear with me, because I know it's not the best television there is, and you could spend your time doing so much more fun things, like painting yourself. I guess you could have this on in the background. My monotonous Northern English tones in the background, annoying the shit out of you as I fuck up little bits of paint. But there we go. That's why this scheme is forgiving. We'll deal with that in the next phase. Okay, let's finish you and me. Nearly there. Nearly there. Sound like a soundtrack from a rebel fighter pilot in Star Wars, don't I? Some bits. I'm just looking to see the wrist joints. No, I couldn't see them on that one, but I can on this fella. I've missed? That looks different. Just on the back there. There. Anywhere else? I think. I did actually. No, I did. Anywhere else? Speak now, muddle, or forever hold your peace. Oh, what do you need now? A little bit there. Right, got them. Let's go back. Anything I've missed on the other ones? Yes. Let's get the other side of. Oh no, my hand. I missed it. It's fine. You're good. Yep, I'm calling that. Oh, come on, you shitty Perry. Right, I'm calling that. That's enough. Oh, red there. Right. For this one, let's clean the brush again. Let's just make sure we've got none of that paint lingering around on that fella. Just use the soap again. Just run the brush over there. Just take the paint off, make sure it's all gone. Alright, it's looking quite clean there. Let's give it a rinse and a clean one. There we go. What I'm going to do as well, I just roll that in the soap just to help keep the point on the brush. There we go. Pop it over there for a moment. There we go. Right. Right, I'm glad that one's done. Next up, we've got a final dry brush layer. This one we've got Pallid Witch Flesh. Another really rubbish, murky Games Workshop. This one doesn't have any ball bearings in yet, so I'm going to put 2 in. But what I'm going to do first is I'm going to change my water here, clear these out, so we've got fresh water to work with. So back in a moment or two as I just clean these through. Here we go. Fresh water pots for our use. Let's move that out of the way. Let's shift these along. That fella's just drying. There we go. Right. More ball bearings into our paint. Yeet. There we go, that was easier. Let's mark it, we've got 2 ball bearings in. Little Sharpie. And then let's give it a bit of a run. Fundamental mistake. Let's not lose any balls here. Right, give it a good mix up. Paint's quite thick for this fella. We're getting there. Right, there we go. Right, because we've just done some paint on our warriors, we're going to do the dry brushing on those fellas last. Give that contrast plenty of time to dry. While it does, I am just going to go and have a piss and grab another beer. There we go. Right. Let's crack open another one. Let's get this dry brushing done and then probably be it for the night. I'm getting moaned at for taking all of the bandwidth, apparently. Which is, you know, I don't care too much for that because, hey, I pay for it. And I do think it means that some people haven't spoken to the people they expected to tonight. Hey ho! Right. Pallid Witch Flesh Dry Brush as the next activity it is. Oh, paint pots. Let's give this a go. So with this one, should be the last layer of dry brush we need on this one. This really is just going to be the last catch the highlights, relatively light layer, just get those little bits, just highlight along, and that should then be these bodies done. Which means we can then move on to more interesting bits and pieces. So for the warriors, we'll need to move on to their claws and swords next. That's probably the main focus. The infestation nodes, we can work on the purpley anus middle bits with a bit of purple and crimson wash, a bit of pink dry brush to highlight the internalness of those elements, help them come up. The heads, I'm probably going to wait a little while because I think the next thing for those will be the same kind of activity as the mouths, teeth and that of the warriors themselves, so a similar kind of colour set that we need to put in there. Alright, nearly done with these fellas. Some kind of forbidden cookie sandworm type stuff going on here. Right, that's lovely, that's really caught it nicely. On to head number one. Load the brush up again. Heavy. There we go. Yeah, I said, fortunately this camera is a good webcam. It's a rubbish cam. We're doing what we want to do here. I don't even know if you can get to see what we've got going on there. I'm not quite focusing in on this one. Yeah, well, a little bit more. So, I'll quite happily spend $1,000 on lenses and a really good DSLR for this, but I think I need a little bit of kind of buy-in from subscribers for that, and considering this is all a bit shit, I don't think that's going to happen. So anyway, live with my dulcet tones, my rambling, my muttering about stuff. It's probably what you want. I can't play music, otherwise you'd have an awesome mix of 90s and noughties indie dance and punk. Because of copyright, I'm not allowed to do that. When I finish here, I'm going to play some very loud music with headphones so I don't wake up the family. I'm probably going to play a bit of Frank Turner. Folk pop. Quite an interesting combination. And some lovely lyrical twist on that one from a very damaged individual who is awesome. Right. Those are done. My phone's going berserk. I don't know what's going on with it. I'll check that all in a minute. Right. God, all my phones are beeping now. Right. Last layer on these guys now, and this is where we did our red on here. What we're doing is we're also catching the ridges within those vents. We're softening up that red quite a bit. Again, hard to tell. I don't want to overdo it too much with this. Catching those edges, catching those highlights. Relatively light with this compared with some of the earlier layers. We don't want to overdo what we've already dry brushed, so we don't want to go over it too often. We still want to make sure we get all these highlights in. Get them all sorted. From the camera then. Make sure we get all of our model. You'll do. It's hot in the UK. I have a window open. I am being absolutely bombarded by bugs at the moment. I've just been coming in crazy just at the moment, despite the fact I've got my curtains closed and I shouldn't be able to get in. All of a sudden, I've just been absolutely bombarded. Never mind. That feels a bit sticky. Let's give that a go. Find out why people are pinging me. Nothing catastrophic. We're all good. Just drying the brush. Let's keep going. Right. Probably foolish of me actually to mention Frank Turner a moment ago, because I've just got his tunes rolling through my head now. Let's go and do something about that in a few minutes. Right, I'm getting close to being done for this evening, so let me just keep pushing on with this dry brushing, finishing off the skin of these fellas. And then tomorrow we can maybe do a little bit offline and come back and do some more of the more interesting bits and pieces tomorrow. See where we go with that one. I think what tomorrow maybe, or Sunday or Monday, whenever the next opportunity is, when I've got the house bandwidth as it appears to be. Could be a whole bunch of unboxing and building of the new Tyranid releases. I have to admit, I'm quite looking forward to. The Leviathan box was, despite being push fit, it was quite a pleasant put together. I agree, there was not necessarily a lot of well, no, the poses were all very dynamic and there was lots of them, but then they're going to be repeated quite often in the if you get multiple boxes of them. So for example, Screamer Killer was quite awesome, but you don't want 3 Screamer Killers all looking exactly the same on the tabletop. It'd be a little bit of an odd one, that. So I enjoyed putting together Leviathan. Not painted it all yet. I will share some of that with you as we go through and progress. Right, one more to go and then we can be done for this evening. I'm going to listen to some punk rock and feel good about myself. Have another beer. Have another beer. Go to bed too late. Regret it. Have an awesome Saturday. We've got international rugby in the World Cup. Got international football. The weather in the UK is going to be awesome and hot. And we're looking at what? 30, 31 degrees. So let's be having a grill. Enjoy the weather with the family. Be outside. Drag the old TV outside and watch a film together. Be European and decadent. Get bitten to death by mozzies and mids. Run out of bite cream. Because, you know, nobody gets bitten by insects in the UK. We live in the UK. It's mild. We don't get anything going on here. So on Sunday I will be watching The Last of Us. Somehow somehow avoided watching it so far, but we've got the series on Blu-ray now, so I'm quite looking forward to that. It should be really quite interesting. I know it can be harrowing. I know it's from the game. It's quite reminiscent of the novel The Girl with All the Gifts as well. That shares a very similar premise of mushrooms being kind of like the next zombie. I'm looking forward to watching that. That should be really good fun. Well, should be very entertaining when I go through. Let's give you a good nudge in here. Right. I'm going to call that quits for today. I'm going to go off and I'm going to clean my brushes. I'm going to go off and get some paints ready for the next session. Thanks for joining me. I don't think anybody did, but if you did, I hope you weren't bored senseless. Look after yourself. Be good to people. Don't be a dickhead. See you soon.